Parker when duty meets destiny. The steel door slammed shut with a finality that echoed through Officer Maya Chen's chest like a death knell. She stood in the dimly lit corridor of Block C, her hand still trembling on her baton, staring at the woman she had just locked away. Inmate 7249, Aria Santos, sat on the concrete bench with blood dripping from her split lip, her dark eyes blazing with a defiance that should have made Maya feel victorious, but instead carved something hollow in her stomach. This was the third time this month Maya had subdued Aria during a fight, and each time, those eyes haunted her long after her shift ended. Maya had built her entire identity around being untouchable. 10 years on the force, 5 of them in maximum security, and she had never wavered, never questioned, never felt. Her colleagues called her the Ice Queen, admired her for maintaining perfect boundaries in a place where vulnerability could get you killed. She came from a family of law enforcement officers, generations of Chen men and women who wore the badge with honor, who believed in absolutes, in right and wrong, in the clear line between those who enforce and those who are punished. Maya had internalized those lessons so deeply they became her armor, protecting her from the darkness of this place, from the broken souls she guarded, from any connection that might make her weak. But Aria Santos was unraveling that armor thread by thread. The prison cafeteria incident that changed everything happened on a Tuesday morning, when the November rain drummed against the barred windows like imprisoned fingers seeking escape. Maya was supervising breakfast when she noticed Aria sitting alone at the corner table, barely touching her food, her usual fire dimmed to dying embers. Something about her posture, the way her shoulders curved inward as if trying to disappear, made Maya's trained eye linger. Then she saw them, 3 inmates from the North Side gang, circling Aria's table like sharks who had scented blood in the water. Maya knew that look, had seen it 1,000 times before violence erupted. But protocol said to wait, to watch, to only intervene when necessary. But when the lead gang member, a woman named Scorpion who had murdered her own sister, reached for Aria with hands that promised pain, Maya moved without thinking. She was there in seconds, her body between Aria and danger, her voice cutting through the cafeteria noise with authority honed by years of command. The standoff lasted only moments, but in that charged silence, when Maya glanced back to check on Aria, their eyes met and something fundamental shifted in the universe. Aria's expression held no gratitude, no relief, only a raw, penetrating awareness that stripped away every defense Maya had constructed. In that instant, Maya saw past the inmate number and prison jumpsuit to the woman beneath, someone who had survived horrors Maya could only imagine, someone whose strength wasn't born from privilege but forged in fire. And Aria saw her too, really saw her. Not the uniform or the authority, but the woman who had chosen to stand in harm's way for someone the world had already condemned. The weeks that followed were torture disguised as routine. Maya found herself assigned to Aria's block more frequently, whether by coincidence or some subconscious manipulation of the schedule she couldn't admit even to herself. She learned Aria's story in fragments, gathered from official files and whispered conversations. Aria had been a promising medical student, brilliant and passionate about healing, until the night she killed her abusive ex-boyfriend who had put her younger sister in the hospital. Self-defense, the lawyer had argued, but the jury saw a woman of color with a history of fighting back, and they made her an example. 7 years into a 20-year sentence, Aria had transformed, from a healer into someone who survived through hardness and isolation, her medical knowledge now used only to patch up inmates after fights, her dreams buried under the weight of institutional cruelty. Maya began doing small things that could be explained away as standard procedure but felt like rebellion. She ensured Aria got library access during the quietest hours when she could read in peace. She looked the other way when Aria helped a sick inmate in the medical wing beyond what was allowed. She found herself scheduling her rounds past Aria's cell, their exchanges brief but laden with unspoken recognition. Aria never thanked her, never acknowledged these gestures, but Maya caught the softening around her eyes, the way her rigid posture relaxed slightly when Maya approached, the ghost of something that might have been a smile in a different world. It was a dangerous game they were playing, an emotional tightrope stretched across an abyss of consequences neither could afford to fall into. The night everything unraveled started with screams echoing From the East Wing during the midnight shift, Maya ran toward the chaos, her heart pounding against her ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom, following the sound of violence that was too familiar in this concrete hell. She found Aria in the shower room, pinned against the wall by Scorpion and two other gang members, her face already bruised, her eyes fierce but afraid in a way that made Maya's blood turn to ice. The rational part of her brain, the part trained to follow procedure, to call for backup, to assess the situation strategically, went silent. All that remained was the primal need to protect, to save, to prevent the unthinkable violence she saw coming. Maya later couldn't remember the details of the fight, only the blur of movement, the crack of her baton against flesh and bone, the way she moved with a ferocity that shocked even her. When it was over, 3 gang members were restrained. Maya's knuckles were bleeding, and Aria was sliding down the wall, her body finally giving in to shock. Maya should have called for medical, should have documented everything properly, should have maintained the distance that her badge demanded. Instead, she knelt beside Aria, her hands gentle as they assessed injuries, her voice soft as she murmured reassurances meant only for this woman, this beautiful, broken, fierce survivor who had somehow become her entire world. And when Aria's hand found hers and squeezed with desperate gratitude, Maya knew she had crossed a line from which there was no return. The investigation that followed was inevitable. Security cameras had captured everything, including the way Maya had touched Aria, the tenderness that no amount of professional justification could explain away. Her captain called her into his office with disappointment heavy in his eyes, the kind reserved for those who betray not just rules but principles. Maya sat across from him, her uniform suddenly feeling like a costume, and listened as he detailed her options. Resign quietly with her record intact, or face formal charges of conduct unbecoming an officer, possible fraternization violations, and the destruction of her family's legacy. The choice should have been simple, should have been obvious, but when Maya closed her eyes, all she saw was Aria's face. The woman who had awakened something in her that felt more real than anything she had built her identity upon. She resigned the next morning, each signature on the paperwork feeling like both an ending and a beginning. Her family's reaction was devastating. Her father's silence more painful than any words. Her mother's tears the indictment she would carry forever. Her colleagues whispered, some with sympathy but most with judgment, their loyalty to the brotherhood outweighing any understanding of the heart. Maya cleaned out her locker alone, stripping away a decade of service, of purpose, of the identity she had worn like skin. She should have felt lost, unmoored, but instead, she felt something unexpected, free. The transition to civilian life was harder than any combat she had faced behind prison walls. Maya found work as a security consultant, a job that paid the bills but felt hollow after the intensity of her former life. She lived in a small apartment across town, far from the prison, far from her family, starting over at 40 with nothing but questions about who she was. Without the uniform, she went to therapy, unpacking years of rigid conditioning, learning to recognize that the feelings she had suppressed weren't weaknesses but the most human part of herself. She joined support groups for former law enforcement, finding community among others who had left the force for reasons their families couldn't understand. And every night before sleep, she thought of Aria, wondering if the sacrifice had been worth it. If love could survive when one person remained caged while the other walked free. Maya began attending prisoners' rights meetings, lending her insider knowledge to advocates fighting for reform. She volunteered with organizations that provided legal support to inmates, particularly those serving time for defending themselves against abusers. Each act felt like penance and purpose combined, a way to honor what Aria's presence in her life had revealed about a system she had once served without question. She wrote letters to Aria, pouring out her heart onto pages that prison officials likely read before deciding whether to deliver them, not caring about the violation of privacy, because the truth needed to be spoken. She told Aria about her days, her struggles, her growth, and most importantly that she was waiting, that whatever time it took, however many years remained on Aria's sentence, Maya would be there when the gates finally opened. 6 months after Maya's resignation, a miracle arrived in the form of a civil rights attorney who had taken interest in Aria's case. New evidence had surfaced, testimony from witnesses who had been too afraid to come forward during the original trial, documentation of the ex-boyfriend's history of violence. That had been suppressed by a corrupt detective. The attorney, a fierce woman named Jennifer, who had built a career on overturning wrongful convictions, believed they had grounds for an appeal. Maya threw herself into the effort, using every connection she still had, raising money for legal fees, organizing letter-writing campaigns, turning her pain into action. It consumed her, this fight for justice, but it also filled the emptiness that leaving the force had created, giving her a purpose that aligned with her heart, rather than contradicting it. The appeals process was agonizing, a marathon of legal motions and court appearances that stretched across 18 months. Maya attended every hearing, sitting in the gallery where Aria could see her, their eyes meeting across the courtroom with a communication deeper than words. She watched Aria testify, her voice steady as she recounted the night she had fought for her life and her sister's safety, the trauma she had endured, the person she had been before the system tried to erase her. Maya's heart broke and swelled simultaneously, pride and grief warring within her chest, as she witnessed the woman she loved refuse to be diminished by the institutions that had tried to crush her spirit. The judge, a gray-haired woman known for her fairness, listened with an expression that gave nothing away, and when the hearing concluded, all they could do was wait. Before we continue with how this powerful story concludes, if you have felt the depth of emotion in Maya and Aria's journey, if their struggle has touched something within you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue bringing these meaningful stories to life, sharing narratives of love that challenges boundaries and prejudices that still exist in our world today. The verdict came on a cold January morning when frost painted patterns on Maya's windows like nature's celebration of hope. The judge ruled that Aria's conviction had been based on suppressed evidence and procedural violations that denied her right to a fair trial. She vacated the sentence and ordered Aria's immediate release, her words ringing through the courtroom like bells announcing liberation. Maya couldn't stop the tears that streamed down her face, couldn't contain the sob that escaped when Aria turned to look at her. When their eyes met and years of anguish transformed into joy so pure it hurt, the prison processed Aria's release with bureaucratic slowness that felt like additional torture. But finally, after 7 years of captivity, she walked through the gates into a world that had continued without her, into uncertainty and possibility combined. Maya waited outside the prison, her heart thundering so loudly she could hear nothing else, watching as Aria emerged into the afternoon sunlight wearing donated civilian clothes, carrying a small bag of belongings that represented all she owned. For a moment they stood apart, two women separated by 10 feet of sidewalk and a lifetime of trauma, neither sure how to bridge the gap between who they had been behind those walls and who they might become together. Then Aria smiled, a real smile that transformed her entire face, and Maya crossed the distance in 3 running steps, catching Aria in an embrace that felt like coming home after being lost at sea. They held each other while the world spun around them, 2 hearts beating in synchrony, and Maya whispered against Aria's hair the words she had held inside for 2 years. "I love you, I love you, I love you." Their journey together had only begun, Maya knew. As they walked hand in hand away from the prison that had defined both their lives, Aria would need time to adjust to freedom, to heal from years of institutional trauma, to rebuild an identity beyond survival. Maya would need to continue her own healing, to reconcile the woman she had been with the woman she was becoming, to learn that love didn't make her weak but gave her a different kind of strength. They would face judgment from a society that couldn't understand their connection, prejudice from those who saw only a former officer and an ex-convict, challenges that would test every promise they made to each other. If this story moved you, if you believe in love's power to transform us, to make us question everything we thought we knew, and to become better versions of ourselves, please leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. Your words matter, and hearing how these stories affect you reminds us why we continue telling them. But as they drove away from that place of concrete and despair toward an unknown future, Maya knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice. She had traded a badge for a heart, authority for authenticity, the approval of a system for the love of a woman who had taught her what courage really meant. Some would say she had thrown away her career, betrayed her oath, crossed a line that should never be crossed. But Maya understood, now that the greatest betrayal would have been ignoring the truth of her own heart, that real honor wasn't found in blind obedience, but in standing up for what was right even when it cost everything. Beside her, Aria reached over and took her hand, squeezing gently, and in that simple gesture was contained every promise of the future they would build together, brick by brick, day by day, two women learning to be free,